So I want to start the show using a word I'll use 2 or 3 or 5 times here in the next few minutes. And the word is available. Who are your best friends? Do they have the fanciest cars? Did they go to the coolest prep schools? Or are they available in times of crisis for you and your family? Kawhi Leonard is not available again for the Clippers, and Paul George just pulled off one of the greatest halves in NBA playoff history. But Paul George isn't just about last night when Paul George had a stinker earlier in the series. There he was, first guy to talk to the media. Available on the bad nights, too. A lot of people in the NBA want to be paid like ones, demand to be ones, but they don't want to do all the one stuff. Paul George is a 2, right? Maybe he's the one on this team. 83% field goals, 75% on threes, 100% on free throws in the second half against a very good Suns team. The truth is, Paul and Kawhi are very similar. In fact, I could make the argument Paul George is the closest thing to Kawhi in the league. Strong, wiry players, same size, great wing defenders, went to California non-power basketball schools. Both chose the Clippers over the Lakers. But one is viewed, Kawhi, as clutch and Paul as viewed as inconsistent. Does availability matter? That feels like a clutch asset to me. Kawhi is missing again. And here is Paul George, and listen to this stat, who has played 130 more minutes than the next closest NBA playoff player. One of the reasons Michael Jordan's flu game is so iconic, because Michael had 102 fever and was available. Kyrie Irving, Anthony Davis, Kawhi Leonard. Yeah, I know it's injuries, but it's more than fair to say, I don't know if they'll be available. Sometimes Kawhi, Kyrie are not available emotionally. Anthony Davis sometimes not available physically. I think we have to kind of reboot how we think about clutch. Are you showing up to work? Well, it's injuries. Yes, I'm not disputing that, but being hurt a lot makes you less of a reliable teammate. I look at these playoffs and I'm like, let's go to Paul George, Mr. Inconsistent. The 3 biggest games for Paul George in these playoffs. Game 7 against Dallas. He played 44 minutes, 22 points, 10 assists, 6 rebounds. Game 6 closeout game against Utah, 46 minutes, 28, 7, and 9. Game 5 against the Suns, 41 minutes, 41 points, 13 rebounds, 6 assists. In those 3 games, he missed 1 total free throw. Paul has his bad moments, but they sure don't seem to be in the biggest spots. And what I like about Paul George is not just that he gives you 45 minutes every time there's a big game. He plays defense in every big game. He gives you physicality in every big game. He talks, win or lose, after every big game. There's just an availability quotient to him. He is there mentally ready to go. He's there physically ready to go. And I can't simultaneously criticize Anthony Davis, Kyrie, and then not give Paul George credit for what he is and they're not. Ready to play 45 minutes every big game. Here's a stat for you. So last night was the 18th Clipper playoff game, right? Paul George has 20-plus points in all of them. 4 guys have done that ever. KD, Kobe, MJ, and Paul George. Like, we gotta reboot a little bit what we think clutch is. And it's not just his points. Paul's always there, good or bad, 45 minutes, great defense, incredible effort, talk to the media afterwards, take the bullets when they're flying. And it's not a shot at Kawhi. I know he got hurt, but Popovich got tired of him. Toronto could never figure him out. Last year, the chemistry was terrible with him. He's nonverbal and communicative. That's part of being available. He's not available that way. Paul George is. Boogie Cousins summed up and defended Paul George after last night's Clipper win and Paul George performance.
I don't know where this trolling has come from, where the internet controls the narrative about these players. It's becoming foolish, man. Like I said earlier in the year, that's one of the most special players to ever lace his shoes up. Get this dude his flowers, man. I don't understand the slander. It's becoming quite silly now.
Rick Bucher, brought to you by Mercedes-Benz, the best or nothing. Let's have him join us live. Thoughts on last night. So let's start with Rick. Do you view the series differently as the old dudes beat up on the young kids last night? Do you view it this morning differently than you did before that game?
No, I always thought that was going to be the story between these two teams. Obviously, there's one old guy on the other side of the equation. If I look at last night, though, I think really what it came down for me is looking at the Suns' two best players in Devin Booker and Chris Paul, and Devin Booker's game not having matured enough, and Chris Paul's having matured too much. He's playing the old guy, I've got to fool the referee, I'm living off of guile game, and he's not getting it done that way. And meanwhile, Devin Booker has not ever had the experience of running a team, particularly at this level. He's done it, and with mixed success during the regular season. So if you don't have either one of those guys operating at optimum value and ability, then that's going to take away your third best player, DeAndre Ayton, who really lives off of what those two guys do. So the Clippers are the older, more experienced team. The hedge on that is they don't always play like the older, more experienced team. When they do, you get results like last night. When they don't, then you get results like you did in Game 4.
Yeah, it's Paul George's. He had one of the great halves of all time. I said this earlier. One of the reasons Kyrie, AD, Kawhi Leonard, I don't always know emotionally what I get in big games. I don't always know physically what I get. We always talk about AD is the world's best two. Is it possible that Paul George is, this sounds weird, he's a one, but he's a lower one? You know what I mean?
I would say, yeah. He's a hologram. He can be a one, he can be a two, but you never know which one you're going to get. Here's the reality. Everybody wants to get to this place where we're comfortable with Paul George. To your point, we want to say this is what Paul George is. Folks, I have an announcement for you. We're all on this boat. It's going to be rocky until Paul George stops playing. We're never getting to land, okay? We're always going to be on the boat, and it's always going to be pitching one way or another. You are going to get games where he looks like a one, where he's amazing. And then you're going to get quarters where he's going to look amazing. The third quarter, he was on. First quarter, he was a disaster. I mean, it was fortunate that all the other Clippers had it going. The Clippers are at their best, and Paul George is at his best when he defends, when he rebounds, and he sees himself as part of this collective offensively. When he's aggressive, but he's not trying to do too much.
Yeah.
Offensively, his game is a real feel and flow game. So it's going to look good at times, and then times it's not. Game 4, there was no flow to that game. Paul George, no flow to his offensive game. Game 5, Clippers find some flow. The ball's moving, everybody's got it going. Paul George joins the party, and you've got it going. I think that's the distinction, is that we want to put Paul George in that category as a fire starter, and he's really not. He has the talent to be, but his decision-making ultimately does not allow him to be that. So if you can minimize the decisions that he has to make, if he's just decisive, I'm either going to go or I'm going to move it offensively, and then he rebounds and he defends the way he can because he's such an elite athlete, then you are getting the best of Paul George. And by the way, let's not be giving him an out because he's played the most minutes of anybody in the playoffs, as if fatigue is somehow the reason that we get these up and down performances. His first quarter was his bad quarter. His third quarter was his best quarter. If I'm going to have an issue with fatigue, I would think it would happen in the second half rather than at the beginning of the game.
All right, Scottie Pippen's got a book out. I don't think he would have written it without the documentary by Michael Jordan. It feels like a lot of grievances. It feels like cable political television where it's just grievance.
Yeah.
Whereas I think Jordan's documentary was celebrating what was great and rocky and tough about the dynasty. There's claims now from Scottie that he didn't get a final shot. Kukoc did. It was racial with Phil Jackson. What's your reaction to that?
Is the book called Axe to Grind? Was that the title of the book? Because it should have been. Look, that's who Scottie is. The idea that Phil Jackson's decision to have Tony Kukoc take the last shot in the game, I mean, at the time, nobody looked at it and went, wow, that's a curious decision. Why is he dissing Scottie like that? It was more like, yeah, I could see why he would do that because Tony is the better knockdown shooter in the last situation like that. So, and by the way, did he not? Yeah, he made the shot. So what are we talking about? Right. Why are we re-adjudicating this at this point? Here's the one thing I will tell you is that at that time, and with Scottie's era of NBA players, the belief was that the rise of European players was the NBA's way of maintaining a certain percentage of white players in the league. The U.S. American-born white players weren't making it in, very, very minimal number. And the belief was, among players in the NBA at the time, was that the reason the Euros were gaining popularity and traction was because it allowed the league to maintain a certain number of white players in it. So I don't know if that thought, whether you believe it or not, that theory is what informed some of what Scottie was saying. But, I mean, let's face it, whether he's saying that Phil was racist toward Kobe or Scottie, there was never any indication. Now, Phil could be selfish. Phil could be like, I'm going to do what's best for me. But I always got the sense that Phil's decisions were based on how do I win, how to maintain my championships, and nothing beyond that. There was never a glimmer in all the time that I covered Phil Jackson, whether it was in L.A. or Chicago, that I ever got the sense that there was ever a decision made based on race.